that would make a good chairman of the Fed for a future chairman of the Fed, let's say.
Interesting. So I think if you look around the current membership of the Federal Open Market Committee, we have a pretty disparate group of people. There are people who were attorneys, people who worked in the financial markets. We have a good number of macroeconomists and non-macroeconomists. We've had people who are microeconomists too over time. So I think any background, I think you can do this job with any of those backgrounds. I think it really helped me to spend almost 6 years here as a governor before I became chair. So I did almost every job here under Chairman Bernanke and Chair Yellen. So I knew a lot about the operations of the Fed. I knew the people. So I think all of those things came together to make me comfortable in wanting to do this job in the first place.
So for those people who are wondering, how does one get to do an interview with the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board? Well, I have interviewed Chairman Powell before, but most recently it was a matter of coincidence, and I'll just end with that so you can comment on it. I had to go in early to see my dentist, and the only other person in early that day going in to see the same dentist was Chairman Powell. Of course, I knew when he was there that I wouldn't be getting my teeth cleaned as quickly as he would because he'd be ahead of me, so that's okay. No problem. I understand Washington. But had we not met that dentist, we might not have gotten this interview. So I want to thank you for using the same dentist that I'm using, who's a very good dentist, and thank you for agreeing to let this interview go forward. And I appreciate your hard work and your public service. And Jay, thanks very much for doing this.
David, thanks very much. Always a pleasure. Great to see you. See you at the dentist.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, well, thank you all.
All right, that was David Rubenstein at the Economic Club of Washington, D.C., at least virtually, talking with Fed Governor Jay Powell. Are we back? We're back. Okay, that was David Rubenstein at the Economic Club of Washington, at least virtually speaking with Fed Governor Jay Powell over the last hour. Fantastic interview. A lot of really interesting stuff that we learned from the Fed. He tried to get a lot more out of him in terms of his sequencing plans and in terms of his thoughts on debts and deficits. But Powell has stuck to his knitting, really, in saying that the Fed has mandates from Congress and works for Congress. He has not yet met with President Biden, though he does talk regularly with Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, and says that they have a good relationship. Talking about his key lessons from the pandemic, he talks about the importance of fiscal policy, and says the Fed's regional structure is why it succeeds. And then at the end, some interesting stuff about what you can do if you want to be Fed governor eventually. I think the key is to work at the Fed for a while. He said he's done every job there, and eventually you learn the skills you need to run the central bank. We are also very focused right now on Coinbase. We are hearing that it's closer and closer to trading live. We've seen a number of indications, including most recently an indication that it would open at $376. That's come up a long way from the $340 where we kicked off, and the $250, which is the reference point from the from the NASDAQ. Let's get right now to Sonali Basak and talk about what we can expect in this, the largest direct listing, Sonali, if I understand, the largest direct listing in history.
Yeah, it's a huge direct listing, right? And for NASDAQ, it's really being put to the test here. I was joking around with some of my sources and saying, are you worried about another Facebook moment? At $379 a share right now, that is just shy of that $100 billion valuation that we've been looking for. And as we know, the beauty of a direct listing is that retail interest that you get on top of that institutional interest that is really the landmark of an IPO.
Caroline Hyde in London, in for Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, US officials pause the J&J vaccine push after 6 women develop a rare and severe form of blood clotting. We'll have the latest, plus what it means in the effort to outpace fast-spreading variants. Plus, we are getting a Coinbase direct listing reference price set at $250, giving it a possible $65 billion valuation, and that price ahead of its debut. We'll talk to investor Gary Tan. He wrote one of the first company's checks. We'll get his perspective on where crypto's headed and other unicorns in his stable. And another big step in ride-hailing. Cruise inks a deal to run driverless taxis in Dubai, just 2 years away. We'll get details from CEO Dan Amman. These stories in a moment, but first, US stocks climbed. Record highs, particularly led higher by tech. Let's go to Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow with the latest on that, and of course, well, Coinbase's 50 reference price.
Right, a lot to take in. I guess the story of the day was inflation. What inflation, right? We got that CPI print for the month of March, above consensus, but not enough to worry investors that we'll see any meaningful change in monetary policy or in fiscal policy. And what we saw, fresh records for US equities. The S&P 500, the main gauge of US equities, up by 0.3%, but tech shares really leading the way in the NASDAQ 100, a very tech-heavy index, up by more than 1%. Still some weakness in semiconductors, though, and the US 10-year yield, a little lower, actually. Come with me into my Bloomberg and look at this chart. It's interesting. We got a fresh record for the NASDAQ 100 for the first time since February 16th. If you look on the kind of middle of your chart on that yellow line, it took us quite a few months between September and February to get records, but this new record has come much more quickly, and it's interesting to see the behavior of bond yields, right? They've been trading within a much more narrow range, and as we've discussed on this show so many times, rising yields have really put pressure on tech companies that have big valuations, stretch valuations. Big story, though, is crypto. All about crypto on Tuesday, and so much of that relates to the Coinbase direct listing, $250 per share reference price given by NASDAQ. That would give it a valuation pretty significantly below the one that the private markets gave it in March. That's where we were swapping shares for $350 a share, a valuation in excess of $90 billion. But all of that kind of optimism was boosting Bitcoin on Tuesday. We breached the 63,000 mark. You see a little softness as we go on through the session, and that actually boosted some of those crypto-related stocks. Bitcoin has risen from around 28,000 to 63,000 so far year to date, and so much excitement is around this Coinbase listing. Maybe this reference price puts things on a little bit more muted tone. I don't know. You've got some smart people you're going to talk to in the rest of the show, but I know that at least you and I are excited, Caroline.
Yeah, price targets going way high, and some of those calls from analysts. Ed Ludlow, great roundup. We thank you so much. Meanwhile, let's return to the story, of course, of the J&J shot, because 6 US women between the ages of 18 and 48 who received Johnson & Johnson's COVID vaccine developed blood clots. This after similar issues, of course, with the AstraZeneca shot.
The real thing that is so notable here is not just the cerebral venous sinus thrombosis or the thrombocytopenia. Those two things can occur. It's their occurrence together that makes a pattern, and that pattern is very, very similar to what was seen in Europe with another vaccine.
Now, in the United States, nearly 7 million doses of the J&J single-dose vaccine have been administered, and the news has prompted the U.S. federal health agencies to call for a pause in its distribution. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michelle Cortez to break it down, because when I look at the numbers, Michelle, 6 cases, more than 6, almost 7 million doses given. This is an abundance of caution, but necessary, right?
It's absolutely a vanishingly small number. The concern here is that what doctors would normally do in the case of a blood clot could actually be harmful to women who are experiencing this particular result. And so the doctors want to make sure, the public health officials want to make sure that they know what to tell doctors to do if they're confronted with something like this. You can think of it the same way that we thought about the anaphylactic shock that we were hearing some reports about with the mRNA vaccines early on. It's not a big deal if you know what to do, if you have EpiPens on hand. The problem with these clots at this particular moment is they need to get their ducks in a row so that they know how to treat people who are experiencing this so that they're not worsening the situation.
Okay, talk to us, though, about what the knock-on effect from a PR perspective, it sort of breaks my heart a bit that both AstraZeneca and J&J have suffered this, and both of them are doing this on a not-for-profit basis as well, but they have very similarly made kind of vaccines, right? And how can they stop the knock to safety concerns that we've seen so prevalently here in Europe when it comes to the AstraZeneca shot?
Exactly. They both use an adenovirus in order to deliver the vaccine into healthy cells to be producing these spike proteins, which is what activates the immune system.